So, on that note, Ron, Michelle Obama, as I'm sure you're a huge fan of, is not a fan of third parties. And she'll tell you why in a
None
minute.
of them are.
But let's listen to her at 19 minutes and 15 seconds, Jonny.
And then vote for Joe Biden like your lives depend on it. Look, you all know that politics has never been my thing. But to all the young people out there, to all the Black and brown folks, to anyone who feels frustrated and alienated by this whole system, I get it. I really do. But in the face of all of the frustration and alienation I've experienced throughout my life, never once have I considered not voting as a viable option. Not once have I thought about foregoing a right and privilege that so many before me fought and died for. Not once have I let someone else's ignorance and hatred keep me from doing my duty as a citizen. Because I know we don't have the luxury to assume that things are going to turn out okay. We cannot afford to withhold our votes or waste them on a protest candidate. One of these two men will be president. And only if we vote for Joe Biden with power and with passion will our voices even have a chance at being heard. Because folks who are perfectly content with the status quo, who are quite happy with what's been going on these past 4 years, trust me, whether they say it out loud or not, they will vote too. So we can expect that this election will be won by the slimmest of margins, just like 4 years ago. A handful of votes per precinct in Pennsylvania.
Okay, so you get the gist, Ron.
Thank you. That was hard.
I know. I mean, how does Michelle Obama chastising you for a protest vote make you feel?
Well, first of all, I reject that term, protest vote.
Yep.
I straight up reject it. We do not have, despite how hard they're trying, our elections are actually public elections where people have the right to run. So this idea that, oh, well, it's just a protest vote. And yeah, I know that our electoral system is insanely corrupt.
Yep.
But there's so many things we can do. And this goes into, you listen to her words where she's like, there are people who like the status quo. Wait, you're one of the people who likes the status quo. You're one of the people who likes the status quo, because the status quo is this duopoly where you're trying to just guilt people into choosing between these two horrific choices that aren't a solution for the tasks that we have ahead. Incrementalism is not going to solve climate change. Neither is doing nothing. And we need a better solution electorally that, what would change a lot of that is something like ranked choice voting, which, by the way, both Democrats and Republicans are against ranked choice voting. Why is that? Well, because that would threaten the duopoly. They don't want the duopoly to be threatened. And, her whole spiel about voting, which, I encourage voting too. I do, despite all the problems in our electoral system, I encourage people to go out and vote. I'm not going to wag my finger and tell them how to vote. That's up to them. But I do think people should. But I will say this. Our priorities when it comes to voting are completely backwards. She's not going to wag her finger about something like this when a local election comes up, is she? Or even a midterm, probably not as much. But a presidential, that's when everyone has to show up. It's the other way around. I encourage everyone to vote every opportunity they get.
Exactly.
I think you should do that. But you know what? Where is your vote going the furthest? Where is it the most transparent? Locally, right in your freaking backyard. I'm not going to sit here and say corruption doesn't happen in local politics. Of course it does. It does every day. But there's a lot more transparency in comparison. And that's a vote you should never freaking miss. Because if we all change stuff in our backyard, we'd be looking at a different country. Look at the people who rallied for a public bank here in Los Angeles.
Exactly.
Look at the people who fought along with Shama Zuwan for $15 an hour in Seattle. That's where you really have power. That's where you got power, is locally. What's the second most important as far as electoral politics is concerned? The midterms. What's the third most important, and distantly third as far as I'm concerned? The presidency. And you know what? What do we need even more so than what you do in a voting booth? Direct action. So when Michelle Obama and people like her wag their fingers about like Joe Biden and Donald Trump and putting all this emphasis on Joe Biden, what they're really saying is we like the status quo because we don't really want you to know how real change works. We don't want you to know that real change works through grassroots movements, through protests, through strikes, through direct action, and a lot of it through forcing your elected officials, whoever they are, to do what you want. Because that's how it's always happened. The New Deal didn't happen just because everyone was like, FDR seemed like a nice guy. And FDR was like, I am a nice guy. Look at all this New Deal I'm going to do for you. No, the New Deal happened because there were labor movements and socialists and communists and the working class and unions. And they were united and they were out there and they were strong. And they said, we're not going to take it anymore. And FDR had the foresight to decide, we're going to give up a little bit or we're going to lose everything, rich friends. We better act accordingly. Same with any other successful movement in the contemporary United States history. So, I mean, that was just a bunch of
malarkey
nonsense. And it was malarkey.
That's a bunch
well,
of
and it was
malarkey.
gaslighting. It was gaslighting. She's
Absolutely.
saying these people who are happy with the status quo, well, propping up the status quo.
So, yeah, I mean, vote shaming never worked. Vote shaming didn't work in 2016. Votes are earned. The Democratic Party hasn't earned the votes of the majority of people. But I just want to go off on that because, like I told you before we started the show, I'm seeing a lot of people who were once Jill Stein supporters vote for Joe Biden. And I agree with you 100%. I always emphasize this. We need direct action. We are a country of people that has lost their zeal for protesting, for direct actions. None of what we want is going to be given to us. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party aren't going to give you your power. You're going to have to reclaim that power. And any time where they see mass civil unrest and a mass movement of people not happy with the status quo, they try to quell it. Well, if any other country had been denied any sort of UBI and healthcare during a pandemic, and they were only given $1,200, I can guarantee you that France would have been out in the streets because they are constantly protesting through direct actions over there. They constantly demand from their political leaders, hey, I want this. We need this. This is what we need. If you're not going to do it for us, you're out, and we're going to put someone in there who will. And that's the difference I see in America, Ron. I see Americans getting guilted and manipulated through their emotions to actually continue to support this facade of a duopoly instead of realizing, hey, maybe, just maybe, it requires us to actually get out in the streets, not just against police brutality, but against everything else. Literally, demand single payer, demand rent cancellation. Talk about Julian Assange. Nobody's talking about Julian Assange, save a very few people in independent media. I mean, this is insanity. The fascism that they say happened with Trump was there long before, and it's encroached us now to a point where it's really hard to decipher who is and isn't a fascist, because the Democratic Party, through censorship and control of the internet and the infringement on privacy, does the same thing that the right does. So what is it going to take for people to literally have direct action and stop focusing so much on the top that really, it really isn't going to make much of a difference? It has to come from the local ground up. And I feel like Americans have lost the ability to do that as well.
Well, and I think that's by design. I mean, as far as
Right.
what's it going to take? I mean, I wish I had the answer to that question. I think we all do. And I think a lot of this is by design. When you have, part of the reason that in France and Germany and all these other countries, they can get out and strike when they need to is because their healthcare is not tied to a job. They're typically not one paycheck away from being out on the street. In the United States, that's a lot more common. A lot of people, man, they realize how hard the system's screwing them, but when they're deciding between
Yep.
rent and groceries, when they're deciding, it's really hard to wrap one's head around, we need a general strike to get out of this. But yet we are in a situation where we do need one. It's one of the only ways things will get better is through a general strike. And, and I think the duopoly, I think it's just abundantly clear the duopoly needs to end. And I think that anyone wanting to continue it or entertaining this idea that it can continue, look around you. You know, I mean, whatever someone's going to do in November, I'm not going to fight with some, you know, like it's just not my place. If someone's like, I can't bring myself to vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump, I get it. If someone's like, we got to just get rid of Trump, I'm going to vote Joe Biden, that's your choice. I get it. But what really matters at the end of the day is that no matter what happens in November, the duopoly doesn't stick around. I mean, that's like, I think Lee Camp tweeted something like that, where he's like, do your conscience in November, and then afterwards we try to crush this duopoly. That's what needs to freaking happen, because this idea that Biden's can be pushed left, he's not going for a Green New Deal while the West Coast is on fire. He's not going for Medicare for all when we're in a pandemic and people are dying. And there's a homelessness crisis.
Exactly.
He's not doing it now, and he hasn't even been elected yet. Once he's elected and he's got what he wants from you, which would be your vote, you think then he's going to be able to be pushed? That's just
lunacy.
Nuts. I mean, that's just not going to happen.
It's
You know,
lunacy.
I mean, if you want to get Trump gone, you know, I get that. I don't like Trump either. But if you think like, well, if Biden's in, we can just, you know, that's bad. Like, no, you got to crush the duopoly no matter what happens.
What is your feeling right now at this moment with the election? Because initially a lot of us were like, wow, like, you know, it seems like Donald Trump has it easy. He's the incumbent. He's got a crazy amount of support. Democrats are horrible. But Trump is kicking himself in the foot right now as of late. Who do you think right now has the upper hand in the election?
I think if the election were held right now, this very minute, I think that Donald Trump would beat himself and Joe Biden would become president.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still early October, relatively speaking, early October. And we are living in such an unprecedented moment, which I know is a cliche, but it is true, where it's not even one day at a time anymore. It's 1 hour at a time. So,
Yeah.
you know, I think if the election were held right this very moment, Joe Biden would become president. But I think that could very well change. I mean, if you would have asked me that same question a week ago, I would have said if the election were held right now, Trump would win. I do think right now, because of, you know, just the stimulus, the whole thing with COVID, I think Donald Trump would beat himself and lose. But I think that could very easily change before November. And this is just a big lesson to the American people. You know, you brought up the stimulus thing. We talked about it some. Look at what's going on around you. You have the GOP, who hates you so much, you, the citizen. They hate you so much, they're willing to risk losing the White House to avoid helping you, which is what they're doing. That's definitionally what they're doing. I mean, the Senate could make Trump look like the hero right now, give people actual relief, and he'd be guaranteed re-election. That's just an objective fact. They don't want to do that. They'd rather not help people because they hate you that much. On the other side, the Democrats hate you so much, they're willing to let you be out on the street to just try to make sure they make the other side look bad. That's our system. That's the duopoly. That's what this ridiculous duopoly, where you have two sides who are bought and owned by the same people, this is what it gets you. And you continuously lose. And they feed upon the collective folks' amnesia. They want you to be like, well, the GOP is really brutal. I took a chance on the Democrats before. They're really ineffective. But let me see if these ineffective people have changed. And then you take a chance, and the ineffective people haven't changed at all, and your life doesn't get better. So you're like, well, my memory of the Republicans, they're really freaking brutal, but these Democrats have been really ineffective. Let me take a chance on the brutal ones again. And then the brutal ones are just as brutal. You know, they tell you it takes a Republican wing and a Democrat wing for the American eagle to fly. What they don't tell you is that while that eagle's flying, it shits on everybody's head. That's the part that they don't tell you. And that's what bipartisanship really is. Let us be effective so you can be brutal. Let us be brutal so you can be ineffective. And at the end of the day, the donors are freaking happy. And that is what needs to end.
We are getting shat on by an American eagle, Ron.
That's right.
Thanks for the wonderful picture that I just got in my head.
I do what I can.